Good morning. Welcome to UN50's celebration of Juneteenth, Emancipation Day. What my panelists and I are going to be discussing today is the connection between education and freedom. And we're going to be discussing that with individuals who are in and around the judicial system as well as education. One of the first things I'm going to do is introduce the panel to you, and then briefly, if you need to know more details about our panelists, my name is BJ Council. I am the founder of UN50. And what UN50 does is go around teaching primarily black and brown individuals how to safely interact with law enforcement. I say black and brown, but the information is good for anyone, but because of this climate, most folks who seek me out are black and brown community members. So the first person I'm going to introduce you to is one of the panelists. We're going to go in the order. Again, not going to go into details, but just give you some insight as to who they are. The first person is Lisa L.A. Jones. Lisa L.A. Jones, and she is a retired prison warden and also co-executive director of Haiti Reborn Justice Movement. The next to her is Amina Thompson. She's a magistrate, but she just got elected to Clerk Superior Court elect and will be leaving that position to do that. Next to her is Gerald Anderson, who is a 911 telecommunicator for Orange County and is their outreach and community recruiter. Next to her is one of the most important persons in this conversation is LaMonda Pryor, a principal at a charter school. These are our panelists. At the end of that conversation, we will be talking with Beverly Boone, who's sitting next to me, our historian, and then I'll close it out. Emancipation Day is clearly about the freedom of slaves and slavery, the end of slavery. We all know that during slaves, that owners did not allow and did not want their slaves to be educated or learn. But we also know by history that those few slaves who did learn how to be educated or learn how to read, they would quietly in the darkness of the night teach their families and other members of slaves. So when they were freed on Emancipation Day and beyond that, as they built their communities, the first two buildings that they stood up were church and schools, because education was important to them. Not wanting to educate black and brown bodies listed or continued for the most part to the mid-60s during civil rights. And then obviously we all know the integration, segregation and integration of schools. Harriet Clickman, a white female, wrote a letter to Charles Schultz. You may know him as the creator of Peanuts. She wrote a letter to him 11 days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. As an educator, she wanted him to introduce a black character to the comic strip. Charles Schultz made the decision. He was a little hesitant because in that moment, he felt as though it would be condescending to African Americans during the civil rights. Eventually, he did. A few weeks later, he let Harriet Clickman know because she was writing and trying to figure out how do we do with all this violence and hate and misunderstanding, how do we bridge this gap? He eventually, within a few weeks, introduced Franklin. I have him on my shoulder, not only to represent Franklin as being the first black in that comic strip, but also to represent young black males who are dying on our streets at the hands of law enforcement as well as the hands of each other. Charles Schultz introduced Franklin on July 31st, 1968. He got pushed back a little bit. For the most part, the country was very supportive of that. He, however, got pushed back from a Mississippi editor, wrote a letter to the syndicate who was publishing Peanuts. Charles Schultz told that editor, "You print it the way I draw it, or I'll quit." Even a segregationist understands the lyrics to the new songs. My money doesn't jingle, my money folds. So what we're going to be doing is just talking about what we believe is some of the things, social issues, that have been a part of pushing individuals, specifically black and brown individuals, into the judicial system. For me, I believe education of all the systems that we have is probably the strongest system of all. Because if you're educated, as our enslaved ancestors knew, if you have education, you may imprison my body, but you will never imprison my mind again. So Dr. Craig Waleed will be facilitating this. He is trains in emotional IQ, creating that. And so for my panel, especially LA, he's going to monitor your IQ while we're talking.
Wow. We in trouble.
Yeah, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. So Dr. Waleed, all yours.
Yes, thank you so much. And hello to everyone who's here attending and those of you who are out there watching this by way of video or camera or television or on your phones. But before we start, I definitely want to encourage everyone to take the time to allow their fellow panel members to speak. Be sure to listen to each person, and let's just be patient with one another. And I believe that the only way that we'll really be able to get the most out of what we're doing is to allow each person to share their truth and to share their insights. So with that, and I see everyone nodding their heads, so I see that there's an agreement. I'd like to go forward, and I'll start with you, LA, but I'll pose this question to everyone, so please think about this. And the question is, what do you think, or what are your thoughts or feelings about what drives people of color, particularly black and brown people, to have increased involvement with the criminal legal system, particularly police, jails, courts, and possibly even mental health arrests?
Wow, that is a multifaceted question that I don't even really have. I can try. Hopelessness. Hopelessness is one of the number one problems in our community. Also, I think that a lot of people look at some of the things that you mentioned, and they look at them as problems. Just like, for example, violent crime. People look at violent crime as a problem. I don't think violent crime is a problem. I think violent crime is the symptom of the problems. We need to go back and look at the root causes of these problems. And that is what I believe, those root causes, disparate treatment of black and brown people, criminalizing their skin, criminalizing mental health, criminalizing poverty. All of these things that have that are within our community, and they represent the individuals that end up having involvement with law enforcement so many times. And so I think that if we deal with the root causes of the problems, then that is the way that we deal with the issues that lead to the increased interaction with law enforcement.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. And so we'll just move right down the line.
Well, before we move, I want to because I want us to have this kind of a conversation. And I want to talk about the root a little bit as far as law enforcement, having background in law enforcement. We spend a lot of times, because LA around the guy that always preaches about root causes. Right. And law enforcement are basically just weed eaters. We're not really built, the judicial system does not deal with the root causes. That's right. And law enforcement simply is taking care of the weeds, and all you're doing is piling more officers on top of the weeds, and you're not dealing with the root causes. This system is not built to do that. Those other systems are built to do that. Anybody else have input on that?
That's intentional.
Yeah, and though I'm the moderator, I have to just weigh in real quick, because as we were talking off camera, it makes me think about this problem that grows out, and I quoted an entertainer once who said, the killing fields need blood to graze the cash cow. It's a numbers game, but the shit don't add up somehow, and that's really what it is. It's just, piling weed eaters or rocks on top of weeds. And when you put rocks on top of weeds, they just grow through the weeds and the problem persists.
That's right.
That's right. And then another piece is just that criminalization of black lives, of black bodies, stemming back to the black codes after Emancipation Proclamation. So our bodies continue, our lives continue to be criminalized. That's right. So I don't want to steal the spotlight.
No, I want to make sure that, because I want this to be a conversation among anybody. So if anybody has an opinion, I would love to hear that before we move on.
Yeah.
Well, certainly I have an opinion about it, and I'll express that maybe by, piggybacking on what LA said just about the system and the way that it certainly is not built for us to succeed. It's, there are several facets of the system that I see in my job. Law enforcement is one of them. So many times I hear people say, well, the police told me to come down and take out a charge.
Oh.
That's the solution.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
Yeah.
Instead of determining, what a better solution is,
Yeah.
or being out there in the field, really being able to
Right.
assess if there is a mental health concern, or if there is, and so that's a lot of what I see. And so I would say it does go back to education about, and that means for everybody, for the officers, for the magistrates, for the community, about mental health resources, or what that even looks like. Mental health is certainly on a spectrum, right?
Yes.
And we treat a cold as soon as we feel, a little tickle in our throat.
Yeah.
And if only we did that with our mental health,
Yeah.
and before we have to call the ambulance.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's what I would say, kind of, all together, the education about that, and how to navigate those situations for all of us.
Thank you.
And it was powerful, that piece you made about how we treat a cold, but we won't necessarily treat what's happening in our psychological, emotional selves. I think it's like we've been trained to be ashamed of mental health or mental weakness or mental illness, but it's okay, to go seek treatment for cancer or lung disease or heart disease or something like that. It's almost admirable. People are looked at as heroes when they get treatment for all these other physical ailments, a cavity or whatever. But if I have a mental health disorder or problem, I'm somehow looked at as being weak, and no one wants to be seen as weak. But great point.
And I just kind of want to add, because I start with education very young, and I'm going to go on a limb. I don't think the education system is necessarily designed for Black and brown kids to be successful inside the school building.
Okay.
I think it starts the early on pattern of them leading to going into the judicial system, just by design.
That prison to pipeline,
The prison pipeline.
school to prison pipeline, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And so you also understand that the name of the present of our talk here is Voices of Passion. And the reason I chose that is because, stereotypically people think that Black women are angry. We ain't angry. We passionate.
We curious.
We passionate.
Yeah.
So let's just be real
we
clear as to what you're hearing today. It's for Black
passionate.
women who are passionate about our culture and our future.
That's right.
So just don't get it twisted. Now, there was a reason it was called Voices of Passion, because I don't want you to get it twisted that we're angry. We're passionate about our culture. We're passionate about all persons, but in particular, we're particularly passionate about those persons of color.
Great point.
So,
And
you want to go ahead with Ms. Thompson, our
Yes,
magistrate?
Ms. Thompson, yes, I was going to mention.
Continue with that.
Yes.
And also, too, just got edified by what you just said, because that is huge. You're right. Law enforcement, go downtown, take a warrant out on them. First thing out of my mouth, because I'm ready to get back in my car and go about my business. Because I'm not, and it ain't personal. It's just that it's nothing else I can do, because my law enforcement isn't built to do that. So you saying that just brings a whole new perspective for me from law enforcement, because we do that. Done it, and done it. So you go right ahead, Ms. Thompson.
And a lot of times, that may be the only option a person has, but then it goes back to kind of a socialization and the way that people are, raised to think that that's what you do. To get the law enforcement involved. A lot of people also tell me, well, somebody was able to just come down here and take out a charge on me, so I want to be able to take out a charge on them too. And it's, people do have in their mind a certain way that the system works, and it's obviously, again, not a system that is designed for us to thrive or flourish. So we work within this system that is not built, for us. So that I see as just a huge problem. And then, of course, going back to the mental health, we obviously as a community have to destigmatize mental health concerns, because so many people who are involved in the system, it's not because they are, they might appear angry, but it's, there's something else going on, and we don't know how to cope with it.
Yeah.
We don't know how to manage it.
I would love to just interject.
Go
you
right
said
ahead.
thrive, and that really struck something with me. Not just, and what Craig said about us and seeking mental health solutions we are taught, we as a people, we as women, we are taught that we need to be strong above all else.
Yes.
When something didn't strike me right, when something hurt me, when something wasn't fair in my life, my mother and my grandmother, who loved me with all their hearts, taught me life isn't fair, suck it up. Don't you complain, don't you cry. So I held it in. I held all of those things. A lot of those are the things that lead us to our current state of mental illness.
Absolutely.
Okay? And then not only do we need to worry about the impact of mental illness, we need to think about the way that our mentality needs to change. We are built to survive, not to thrive. That is how we have been taught.
We've been conditioned. That
Yes,
way.
and it wasn't even that our family, our parents, the black and brown people that taught us that. It wasn't that they meant us harm. They knew that we needed to survive to get to a better day.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So now we have to decide at what point do we change from just surviving to thriving. And how do we go about that? And I suggest we do it one person at a time. We take care of ourselves. We start with the person in the mirror.
As
And
we were
I
talking
just want
about.
to add, when you say mental illness, I want people to take that stigma away.
Yes.
Because people are thinking like severe mental illness
Right.
when they talk about mental illness. And you know, we just celebrated that month. So I really try to instill in even my younger people, mental illness is such a vast complexity. It's
Yes.
not just, they need to be institutionalized. It could be
Right.
you went through a trauma and you need to seek some additional counseling.
And all of us have experienced trauma
Right.
in our
Yes.
lives. Yeah. You know.
And so I think that's one, and I want to go back to one thing. It's about the police and the whole system. We have to realize that they are reactionary.
Yes.
It goes back to what you were saying. We need to get into what is the systematic cause.
Yes.
And stop relying on the police and the judicial system, because they are reacting to something way after it has happened.
Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing
If
that.
if I can jump in
Yes,
from
jump right
the
in.
911 perspective.
Yeah.
So for me, with what you said about law enforcement and education, as a 30-year veteran in the emergency services field,
Yes.
working with in 911 training, and now outreach and recruitment for the agency I'm employed by. What we see from the 911 perspective is a system, to your point, that is not built so much really to help, and there is no educational piece to teach people how to use a system that is designed to send help in your time of need. So what we see from our black and brown sisters and brothers in these communities is a lack of public education. Part of my job where I work at is I go out in Orange County and I educate, starting with children, young children, how to properly use the 911 system. A lot of times what we have learned in our communities is when we're having domestic violence, or somebody didn't pay me my $5, or whatever, my friend won't leave, I'm gonna call 911 and call the police on you.
Yeah.
And then we invite that law enforcement agent into our situation.
Yep.
That's right.
Sometimes very prematurely, and then it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go. So for me, I'm looking at how can we help the system, the people that work in the 911 center that are taking these calls, and processing them to help the people that are calling, but we need to educate our children, our adults on how to properly use a system that is not really designed for them.
Yeah.
We have people that use the 911 system not just to get help, quote unquote, but it's their doctor, it's their lawyer, all right, it's their everything, because they've not been taught how the system properly works. And when it doesn't do what they think it should, they say, well, you didn't help me, or you didn't send me what I needed, look what happened.
Yeah.
So I would like to just propose that we have more public education from the agencies that provide the service. Boots on the ground, grassroots, getting out and teaching people how to use the system, what the system is designed to do. These are the questions they're going to ask. They know it's an emergency or you need help, but you have to give certain information so they can make a good decision about who needs to come.
Yeah.
Then it's off of the communication center's back, if you will. Once they send that help, that responder has got to have the proper training and how to deal with whatever that is.
Absolutely.
There's a family history in our black and brown communities of misusing a system that they've not been taught how to use. So we must educate the parents to stop a cycle, if you will, of misuse so that they can learn how to use something that is put there for their benefit.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that insight. And you know, I'm connecting what you just shared back to what Amina was talking about, which was training, and LA was talking about. Everyone so far has talked really about education, training, you know, but I think a big piece of this training also has to do with the service providers, be it the firemen or the police or whoever's coming out. And you mentioned that, and Amina mentioned that, and that's why I connected that, you know, training. But one of the things I think that people fail to sometimes realize is the difference between education and training. You know, and like if we really think about like the etymology of the word educate, it comes from this word educo or educere, which means to bring forward, to bring out that which is latent. And so when our people become fully educated, truly educated, we begin to empower ourselves. We begin to understand our own innate proclivities and capabilities, you know. So once we become well educated, then we become well trained, and then we can make better decisions where we're not inviting potentially traumatic and dramatic and fatal situations and players into our lives and into our communities.
Yeah, well said. And I kind of wanted to jump on what Gerald from the 911 communicator was talking about, inviting the popo into your house.
Yeah.
And then it goes south.
Yeah.
So you know, for me, as far as inviting law enforcement and educating, we're talking about that, you know, part of the education and learning how to communicate with each other. Ms. Amina was talking about, you know, I'm coming down here to take a warrant out on you because somebody else took a warrant out on me.
Yeah.
You know, and now we're in the system. And then you invite the government into your house to listen to your intimate conversations that I don't really want to know. Because you picked up the phone and found out your boo is running around somewhere. I don't need to be in the middle of that conversation. Because then all of a sudden, when I arrest the primary moneymaker in the house, now you're mad. And now you can't pay your bills. Because you done brought me in there to listen to you arguing with somebody because you don't know how to have a conversation. Take a look at our website. There's also a program called Alternative to Violence Prevention. It's a nonprofit organization, and it helps you navigate those particular conversations, and so that it is nonviolent. Because we don't want to come in. As an example, there's a young man now walking around with 10 bullet holes in him from Windsor, Virginia. He was, his car broke down, a police officer took him home. Shortly after he dropped him off, he calls 911 and says, I need you to come over here. Listen to the reason he asked 911 to come over, because his brother would not let him in his mother's room. Police officer gets there and thinks he has a gun in his hand and shoots him 10 times. You brought the government into your house, and now you shot, and now you mad. Learn how to communicate. Learn how to communicate.
And an example of misusing that 911.
Well, just like we just got to talking, not necessarily in his mind, because that's what they're taught to do.
Right.
But the end result is he got shot for calling someone into his home to solve a problem between his brother and his mama. And now he's shot. He survived it, thank God. But just those are the kind of things. I don't need to come into, stop calling the government into your house for these minor things and stuff you need for us for emergency.
Wow, wow. Yeah, thanks for that. And so if we can move, we've all been talking, but we haven't heard from one panelist. And so what are your thoughts about all of these things that have been going on in this discussion? Because we've said quite a lot.
I've been privileged to sit here and listen to everyone, and I think to add to the misuse of 911, growing up in my generation, I know I'm the baby of the panel, I'm from 95, okay? In my generation...
Oh, so you just had to say that out loud.
Yeah. The people. But,
and them.
Yeah. But in my generation, it has been a common thing within the black community to not call 911. That's right. As well. You know, don't call 911 on that brother. Don't call on that sister. You know what you're going to do. You know what's going to happen to them. They're going to get lost in the system. It's going to be your fault. There's been a a large amount of guilt placed on Black and brown people. So I think along with learning about the education that should come behind that, you should be able to determine, okay, when should I call and when is there an alternative? But we shouldn't always say, don't call 911. If someone is about to kill you, you better pick up that phone, okay?
Yeah.
Call 911,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
But learn the proper avenues, learn what could happen, weigh out your options. But this is something that can't happen without the background of education.
Yeah.
And in talking about education, I think of that as an awakening of the mind. And awareness of the mind that goes back into your intellect.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take us back too far, but I have to just give my utmost appreciation and admiration for our ancestors.
Absolutely.
And how far we've come out of slavery, because it was not only the Emancipation Proclamation that got us there. They would have not gotten as far as we have now if it wasn't for that awakening and that awareness of the mind. Those were all seeds that enslaved persons had all along. And when they had their opportunity to come up from slavery, as Booker T. Washington said, that's when they started coming up with their own churches. You have the AME Zion Church, you have the AME churches, you have other Black churches, you have the historically Black colleges and universities that have come from that. So I'll stop there because I'll continue to spill. but that's my piece. Education is the root of all of this.
Yes, absolutely. And it's amazing that you said that. And, you know, as you were talking about the awakening of the mind, I was thinking on two separate things. And first is, I think it was Marcus Garvey, and Bob Marley took the same saying and put it in one of his songs, which was to emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds, you know. And then I'm also thinking about one of the tenets of emotional intelligence, of social emotional learning, which is self-awareness. It all starts with the self. And then as L.A. talked about, by referencing Michael Jackson, you know, the man in the mirror, it all starts with the self. And that self has to be aware, because if we're not aware, we cannot address situations or step into situations appropriately.
I would just like to say, I definitely hear what you're saying. You know, you're talking about changing, and that change requires definitely strategies. One thing we have to remember, though, is that whether we're talking about law enforcement or the Black community or wherever, there's a culture, and there has to be a cultural shift. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. Okay, so we can come up with the most magnificent strategies in our intellectual mind.
Yes.
Okay, as we get educated, as we sit around the water cooler and have philosophical conversations, all of these things, but we are still dealing with culture. We're dealing with the culture of law enforcement, which we know started from slave catchers. Okay, so we're dealing with that culture. And then when individuals like us go in and try to make change, we have to listen to, well, this is the system. The system is not designed for you to change it. You're not gonna you can't fight City Hall. You can't beat yes, you can fight City Hall. As a matter of fact, in order for us to change the way that our lives are going, we have to be adamant about fighting City Hall. We have to be adamant about changing the culture within our community, not taking no for an answer, not being told, no, that won't work, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. No, there is something that we can do.
That's right.
Because the framers of the policies and procedures in our communities always built in a loophole. And they built a loophole in case it was something that they didn't want to do.
So they could back out.
Okay, so my thing is, stop just accepting, no, this is just the culture, this is how things are, there's nothing we can do. I beg to differ.
Powerful, L.A. And you know, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure we get to hear our panelists and everything,
Okay,
Go ahead.
I want to just chime in really quick. You know, when we think about culture too, culture is almost habitual, you know, because it's a way of life. And people get used to this, whatever it is that they're doing, and it becomes their culture. But our small changes through small cells of people, groups, and unity is what brings about that change. And so we've already gone down the line, so I know somebody else wants to chime in. So
Do you have anything? I want to make sure Gerald has said as far from her perspective. You sure? You sure? Because you talk a lot, so I just want to make sure. Do you have this is your opportunity, Miss Recruiter. If you have something to say.
I'm sure he has another question. I'll chime in.
All right. So,
well, it looks like somebody else was going to.
yeah, go ahead.
And it's not necessarily the question, but we talk about culture and education. We're dealing with a lot of some people in Black and Brown who are not educated,
Right.
for various reasons. And so their kids are perpetuating that cycle of education is not the way. Okay, because I'm from the era where we know that we were taught that education is the way. Mm-hmm. And to be real, there is a era out here now where quick money is best money, and not necessarily the education part. Or we have those who have had issues in the school system as parents, and so they're reluctant to be or come to the school system, or they already come with something they had dealt with personally. So when we talk about education and the cycle that it creates, you have students or parents who do not necessarily like school or trust education. You have students and parents who are dealing with just the day-to-day culture, what goes on in their environment. And it creates what we deal with inside the school. And so now you have a school, as I told you before, that is not designed to educate the way our Black and brown kids learn, or to deal with what they deal with mentally coming into the schools. You have a community of people who necessarily does not believe or understand, I should say, understand the power of education. That's what I should say.
Wow.
Because every parent wants the best for their child, but do they really understand the power of education? As she said, understanding that there is a loophole, there is a way out, there is a way that we can help you. And I think I keep going back to this because it's that young child growing up that's going to help change the system.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There it is.
You know, I think
Yes.
Tupac said in one of his interviews, he may not change the world, but he hopes that his words spark the mind of the next person who will change the world.
That's right.
You know, but my follow-up question is then, how do you suggest we begin to educate or change the culture that we're dealing with, of calling the police, of not knowing how to use systems, of all the ills that we're talking about? How do we begin going about change? Anyone?
I kind of want Lamanda to deal with that, and I want her to go ahead and do her passion about the
One of
schools.
things- I think, and you can agree as a historian, I think, the church and the school was always like the hub of the community,
Yeah.
especially for the Black community. And I believe that we should once again become the hub, but become the hub in the right way. The school should be where a lot of the resources, whether it's the parent or the child needs, should be located directly inside the school. I think it should be, not only should mental health agencies be there, it should be health agencies. It should be helping parents with receiving jobs. It should be helping students who aren't learning without a cost. Not just after school, but I mean really helping those who need some serious help with learning. Until we strengthen the family, we can't strengthen the child.
Absolutely.
There you go.
And then
There you go.
we can't strengthen the community.
Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Great
Yes.
point.
Can I chime in and
Absolutely.
piggyback off of that?
Yes, Ms. Young.
I totally agree. I totally agree with everything that you just said. I've had the privilege of working as a teacher in residence at a charter school in Durham for the past 3 years, and I've come across many disparities that are within the Black community firsthand. As far as education and starting it from a young age and them being the future, one of the ways that I try to influence that is by living by example. So I'm a recent graduate of NCCU. I just graduated with my master's of history, and that's cool for me. But the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway from that is that I was able to go back to work and show my graduation photo to my school babies. So I have my third graders, and they're saying, "Wow, you're still in school, and you're old now. You're still doing this." Or Miss Boone, what are you doing this weekend? I have homework to do. Why are you doing homework? You're a big person. You're still doing that, and I'm telling them all of these different opportunities that can come from education. I'm able to tell them at 5:30 in the morning, I had an all expense paid trip to Penn State because of education.
Yes.
And I come from those low income communities. I come from the free and reduced meal programs in school. I come from that. I come from the neighborhoods where you have shootings and all of these things around you. So a change can happen. Sometimes it can happen from a change of environment, but if you can't change your environment, I feel as if as Black and brown people, we have the innate ability inside to foster some sort of change. You just have to have those persons that can help water you along the way. And I'll lead it back into the 911 bit. I feel as if school systems can benefit from maybe having a 911 awareness program. All over the schools, you see these pamphlets and posters along the walls. You see things that say, "This is how you wash your hands." Wear your mask. This is how you wear your mask. These are your sight words. This is your ABCs. It could be something that says, this is the process of the law. These are the 3 or the 4 systems of the law. This is what you should do when interacting with police. This is what you should do leading up to calling 911. So it starts with education. It can start in the schools. I agree with you.
Wow. Go right ahead,
I'm
Sharon.
loving that. So I'll jump back in now. So we are beginning to see, those of us that work in the emergency services field and do what I do, which is outreach, we're beginning now to do more in the schools. So you'll see that now. That might be county specific. Today we're in the city limits of Durham and in Durham County. I work in Orange County, so I can only speak for where I actually work, but we are very progressive in that we have been invited into the schools. They can't wait. They're doing educational programs for their high school students as a recruitment tool to say, hey, if you want to be an EMT or paramedic or work in 911, if 4 years at a school is not for you, let's talk about what you could do and still have a great career, and how do you get there? So I'm having that opportunity and I'm loving it. My second half of the opportunity is for the adults that are working right now that feel like the job they have is not the job they want and they feel stuck. We just started. I'm really proud to tell you that I'm the 911 training coordinator for Durham Technical Community College for the very first 911 training academy designed to help the city of Durham recruit for their communication center, but it's for any communication center because we're all short, trust me. All right, but we're having our first academy, 130 hours of training over a 9-week period. All right, right now we have 8 students that will finish both classes. It's separated into 2 classes, but it's a total of 130 hours. They are go-getters. When I say that these people came into this training, we want a new career, we want to work in the 911 system, it is a pleasure to teach them all that I know and to surround myself with instructors that share my passion. So it is twofold. We are now approaching our children to teach them about a system, and we are teaching adults that might want to work in the system. This is what you need as a knowledge base and a basic skill level to get your feet in the door. And what I tell my adults is, you're now going to be a very attractive candidate. I'm a recruiter. If I see this on your application, I want to talk to you because you had the initiative to take 130 hours of training, 47 which were a telecommunicator certification course, 4 more which was CPR certification. Things that you need at the agencies that are hiring. I'm going to want to talk to you because you've taken that initiative, save me money. Now I need to hire you and get you on board and be your sponsoring agency. So the students that are going through the Durham Tech experience are getting to listen to real 911 calls. They're talking to people like me that have done the work. We're teaching them, basic skill level, how to answer the phone, how to talk on the radio. We have a mock comm center, what it looks like to work at a console. And then in my day job, I get to go to the schools and talk to from preschool right on up through high school about how to use the system. This is what we need when you call. This is why we ask these questions. You need to know where you are at all times so you can tell us. And here's why that's important. You know, so I am very passionate about making sure we educate not only our children but our adults, because I think what it will do is it will, that gap will close up a little bit, or hopefully a lot, and that they'll understand a system that for all points and purposes is really for white privilege. They call, they really expect help to be right there.
Absolutely.
To your point, historically, we might not call because we want to get that brother, that sister in trouble, or we view the system, it's not going to help us anyway, I'm not going to call. Or they won't come over here. We get a lot of that. They won't come here. They won't service us because we live in the hood or we live over here. If you want help, you got to, if somebody's hurt, you got to drag them over the line and call for help and then hope that they come.
And that's a realistic perspective too.
And that's real.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to do in my little corner of the world is help the people at Durham Tech learn what they need to learn. They'll graduate in July. I'm gonna be very proud of that. And the second academy is set to start September 1st. Just a little plug right there.
That's pretty
You
dope.
can find it on the Durham Tech website. It's not up now, but it will be up probably within the next week for registration. But what we're trying to do is get that facet. And everyone I will tell you that's in my class right now is not of the black and brown community. It's a mixed bag of people that said, I want to be part of a system. I want to have a different career. And they're actually seeing working in emergency services as a career. That's a big thing for 911. For so long, that job has not been seen as a career. And so we're getting them on their way, and I'm hoping that we can get them all recruited successfully to an agency and that they will be able to walk in and go to work to somewhere in August, September.
Nice. So that economic change helps to, I think, alter people's trajectory. If I could, just for 1 minute, I'd just like to maybe look at the people who are viewing this and who are listening to it, and I want to invite folks to send in questions, send in comments, and I'm wondering if we have any questions or comments right now.
Yeah. So this is from a friend of mine. I hope you're doing well. I won't call your name out. Thank you for the question. What does the panel think of alternative models to policing that are intended to address social factors or mental health to reduce arrest? So I'll repeat that. What does the panel think of alternative models to policing that are intended to address social factors or mental health to reduce arrest? I want to go ahead and tackle that first and everybody else can chime in. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Because I like just sitting by myself eating a donut. I don't want to be going on a whole lot of calls unless I have to. So the thing is, we just got to be very mindful of how we set that up. I think the city of Durham is looking at how to do that. But we have to be very careful as how we do that, because the reality is some of these situations are, in fact, dangerous. So we always have to make sure that our mental health persons and those that are going to be responding to those incidents and calls have the necessary tool. I know that in some communities and things that I've been reading, that they just merge a police officer in plain clothes with a mental health person to go deal with the issue without, just you got somebody standing there in a shiny uniform. So I think it's needed, I think it's necessary, but it also goes back to education as to, what do you call law enforcement for? How do you understand the process, navigating the process to get the help that you really need. So I am definitely about all of that, but it does, I think, on education. But my primary concern is I've seen some of these things, and if the individual, just because of the law enforcement was so good, it can go south in seconds. And then we have a mental health person who's trying to do the best for our community members, and things don't end well. So we just have to really think about it and not just react because we're mad at the police for killing black bodies and go, well, we don't want the police to come to anything. No, slow your roll. Until you've been there, done that, you don't understand what could happen in those particular moments. So that's my 2 cents on that. Anybody, and let the rest of you chime in. Go ahead, Ellie. I know you got something to say.
Oh, I was going to add that I think, I think it's important, as you're saying, training. And that means for, magistrates, again, police officers, everybody, And I don't think you want to send somebody with a pen to a gunfight, right? You don't want to send your officers ill prepared. So I think it's important for everybody to have training in certain areas. Conflict resolution, de-escalation, everybody.
Yes.
For the magistrates, for the police officers, people in the school systems, teachers, principals, everyone. To try to de-escalate some of those situations before they become volatile.
Exactly. And I'm going to sound like a broken record. Alternative to Violence Prevention is a nonprofit. And if we teach kids in school how to deal with the stuff they deal with on the playgrounds and how to solve those problems, that's going to just continue to teach them how to communicate, what problem solving looks like. So when they grow up, they realize that, oh, this is how I can do and interact with my individual or person or partner, whomever, without having to bring a police officer into your intimate conversation into your house.
And what you're talking about, BJ, is that social emotional learning, you know, which is about managing and building relationships and maintaining relationships and respecting oneself and respecting others, you know. And part of that social emotional learning also teaches us not to stigmatize people and prejudge people, but to take people for who they are. And sometimes even when they show us who they are is not someone that is palatable, so to speak, that we continue to treat them with respect and dignity.
Exactly. Yeah, do no harm.
Well, since BJ called me out, you know,
It don't take much, LA, but go right
it
ahead.
doesn't take much to call me out. I'll share an analogy about my thoughts. You know, I'm sure some of you have heard the analogy about how you're walking to the stream or the river, and it's full of dead fish. The very first instinct is to go over and start scooping the fish, scoop the dead fish out of the stream, okay? Because we're concerned, you know, there are people that are going, oh, poor fish, okay? To me, community-based organizations somewhat have that job. And, you know, a lot of times that is our churches, that is our schools. Those are the individuals that end up doing that. And then there's also going to be an alternative way of seeing it. Some are going to come who are also community-based type organizations, and they're going to look and go, wait a minute, if the fish are dying in the stream, how is this impacting the environment? How are we, you know, someone needs to get in there and treat the water. Someone needs to do these things. And then there's also a group of people who are generally innovators, who will go toward the stream, they'll take a left, they'll go upstream because they want to know what's killing the fish. You cannot deal with systems of oppression with programs. And historically, that is what we, people in the Black and brown community, get. Other individuals get money, they get systems, they get these things, we get programs. So I believe that as far as the alternatives to policing, thank you for asking, BJ, is that we need to stop doing the same thing expecting different results.
That's
Okay,
insanity.
we need to be willing to be innovative enough to take these programs, these community-based programs, which are magnificent, fantastic. Durham, North Carolina especially, has some of the best community-based organizations in the country, but they operate within a silo. That means that one doesn't necessarily know what the other is doing.
They might be doing the same thing.
That's right, they are doing the same thing. And those things require them, what they're doing then is they're competing for the same dollars. Okay, the things that they are accomplishing are not sustainable. Okay, because you have a small group of people working with a small amount of money.
That's the truth.
What we need to do is bring these individuals together into a system, okay? And by bringing them together into a system, then we actually consolidate the resources. We consolidate the manpower. We get to have sustainable parts of this system where we can make some significant change and do things differently other than just calling the police. We're not going to be able to make a change until we do something differently. Stop funding the same old things, expecting different results.
Absolutely. That's a powerful piece.
And
you
one
just
thing
shared
about
earlier.
consolidating all the resources, people can identify where to go.
That's right. You have one place where you can go. Myself and ex-police chief Steve Chalmers are working. We have co-founded a nonprofit organization called the Haiti Reborn Justice Movement. And it's not a social justice movement. It's not a criminal justice movement. It's a justice movement, period. And it is a place where we have the police officers, social justice organizations, individuals from the community are all working together, okay, so that we can put together a system of these organizations. That's the reason why it's not a program, it's a movement. We all have to be willing to work together. Doing it the same old way is not working.
Yeah, exactly.
We need alternatives.
Yes.
I want to step in just really quick, and I heard nonprofit mentioned just a couple of times. I want to give a shout out to a program. It's titled the Public Allies nonprofit organization. It's called Public Allies North Carolina. I had the privilege of graduating from their apprenticeship program. It's a 10-month program, but under the umbrella of Public Allies, it connects people that apply to this program. If you get accepted, it connects you to be able to work in different nonprofit organizations. This is how I came into contact with the charter school that I'm at now. Before I was a full-time TA, I first was there working for this nonprofit organization as a capacity builder, coming into a place that was like a low-income facility that fostered opportunities for minority children. So Public Allies, it connects you with different nonprofit organizations or 501c3s in the Durham County area. I want to say the Orange County area as well. But it's something to look into. Aside from that, once you complete the program, they grant you with a $6,000 stipend to go towards college or to go towards paying off your student loans. So for doing this program for 20 months, I did 2 terms. I've been able to pay down some of my student loans as well as pay for some of these classes that brought me here today. So shout out to Public Allies NC.
Awesome.
You know
Awesome
what?
stuff.
And how magnificent would it be if you had a place where you could go and you had access to all of the different programs that were like that?
Yes.
Because there are some fantastic programs out there that can help, that can do things like that, but people don't know where to go.
I was going to say that, right? Absolutely.
That is the truth.
And even
so-
as in the schools, we meet a lot of parents who looking for help, and they depending on me to call around
That's right.
to figure out like what the resources are.
That's right.
When we can have like that one like hub,
One-stop
again.
shop. That's right.
Where
Where
the
they
rec
There
can go.
needs to be somewhere, where all that's
Right.
consolidated. 'Cause,
That's correct.
You know, we think about it when we come together as a whole, or you think about the hand, the fingers, and then when you make the fist,
That's
the
right.
hand is much more powerful.
Right.
It's
Yes.
much more forceful. But before we move forward, I believe that we have another question coming from our viewers.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
and we're crawling up on 11, so we'll get to the question before. So I want you, Craig, if you don't mind, to kind of give them a little bit about your background,
Yeah.
a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and start working toward the end of the conversation. But we're going to get the question in, but if you'll go ahead and do that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've met some of you ladies already before the camera started rolling, but for those of the people who are watching, as well as some of you who I haven't had an opportunity to talk with, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I served time in New York State's prisons from 1990 to 1997. While I was incarcerated, I began taking college courses. I earned an associate's degree while I was incarcerated. Once I was released, I went back to school in the State University New York college program system, and I earned a bachelor's in health science, went on, earned a master's in mental health counseling, and then in 2018, I graduated with a doctorate degree in a doctorate degree in education, specializing in executive leadership. Most of the work that I've done since I've been back in the community has been work that is focused on people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. And so I'm very passionate about that, particularly passionate about reentry. And so helping empower our brothers and sisters who have been impacted by jail, prison and the trauma that is caused by these systems. So at this point, I use my life and my life's story to empower. I think someone was talking about using their story. I think you were talking about using your story, going back and putting an impression upon the students, letting them know that you can do this, you can change your life, you can move forward. And so your whole thing about education, I mentioned education to folks, my own education, just to say that it was through education that I was able to change my trajectory. And I'm trying to impress upon other people that educate your mind, you can change your trajectory. Educating your mind rewires how you think. And when you rewire how you think, you rewire how you live. And when you change how you live, not only do you change you can change your family's trajectory and your community's trajectory.
Amen.
Thank you, Craig.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So let's go ahead and get to the question that was
Thank you.
from someone in our audience. As it relates to alternative responses or co-response models, a critical component of the process is the assessment of the call by the 911 communicator to determine that an alternative response is needed. How are 911 communicators being trained to make the adjustment to alternative responses?
So 911 telecommunicators for the state of North Carolina first must now, effective July 1st, coming up very quickly, have a minimum of 40 hours of telecommunicator certification training. So I mentioned the Durham Tech program earlier. In that program, we did the telecommunicator certification course, which is through the Sheriff's Standards for North Carolina, which is 47 hours. That is a basic course which does 9 modules over the 47 hours to include a state exam. That is basic, what we call basic training, to address the way now that new services or services will be determined for response by telecommunicators. The training is being developed and taught as an additional in-service training module.
Okay.
So along with our law enforcement or emergency service responders, that will cover everybody, that they are being trained on how they need to respond once they actually get there to assist a person or persons. The telecommunicators are being trained on how to screen those calls more effectively, what questions to ask. If they work for a protocol-driven agency, meaning they use either emergency medical dispatch, emergency police dispatch, or emergency fire dispatch, there are scripted questions based on the answer of the caller, and based on what they say, they'll ask the next question. This is all done, and they are certified to ask questions in this manner. So it is, if you will, to tighten up how they make that decision, how that person or agencies are decided upon and dispatched for that response. Awesome. Hopefully that will assist.
Yeah.
If I could,
Okay.
I'd like to give a little bit of information, since we're talking about a system and we're talking about 911 in general. These stats you can find on the internet. These are from 2020, but for our state in North Carolina, there are 115 primary public safety answering points. What that means is that there's 115 agencies that if you dial 911 anywhere in their jurisdiction, somebody's going to answer the phone. There are 12 what they call secondary public safety answering points across the state. What that means is that that agency may not answer primarily 911, but they may answer a number that is considered an emergency response, and they may have to shunt that call or caller to the agency that actually provides that service. Usually it's EMS or fire. Most agencies do law enforcement unless it's a specific fire or EMS agency. So that means we have 127 public safety answering points across the state of North Carolina. We have 100 counties, all right? And depending on the size of the agency, it could be what I call a one-seater, all the way to our major large centers like Durham, Raleigh, Charlotte, even Little Orange County. I always say we're small, but we're mighty, does quite a bit of business when it comes to 911. In 2020, all these 127 public safety answering points answered over 7 million calls for service. Those are the ones that they actually probably created a call in a computer-aided dispatch and somebody got sent. okay? Of those over 7 million calls, 79.4% came from a wireless caller. Somebody used their cell phone. If you want the actual number, it's 5,713,316,000 callers. 12.5% were what they call wireline. That means, like my grandmother, if she was still alive, people in that era, they still have an old-fashioned phone with a cord on it. I know some of y'all out there don't know nothing about that, but that's what they call a wireline. So 12.5% of the people that called for assistance in 2020, a little over 898,000 callers, are still have a real phone line in their home or wherever they call from. 8.2% of those 7 million call from what we call voice over IP. So an example of that is if you have, say, Spectrum for your internet service. If you or anybody, you know you can't just get internet service, they had to give you that voice over IP. That means that your phone runs on electricity and the internet. So that if your electricity is out, like at my home, my service is out now. If I was dependent on a voice over IP phone, I would have no phone service. But if you have a wireline and the power goes out, and you still have service to dial 911. Now you can't call and talk to your neighbor or your friend, but you can call for help, and that is the purpose of making sure you can get some assistance. So I like to tell people these stats so you can understand the weight of what's on the system called 911 emergency services, and what these telecommunicators and everyone and law enforcement and EMS and fire are really up against when it comes to delivering good service. It is the training and education, it is, and learning how to use those resources and then to resource allocate smart. But if you don't use the system correctly, then we got over 7 million people calling for help that don't know how to use the system and are clogging it up with things that prevent us from sending the police where they really need to go, or that ambulance, or that firefighter. So my plea always is, think about, do you really need to dial 911? And if you do, we want you to call. But be prepared to know where you are. Tell us where you are. That's important. That's the first thing we ask. What is the location of your emergency? We want to know where you are, and then we want to know what's wrong. And then we take the rest of the questions from there. So that's my spiel on that.
Thank you very much. And just so you know, Gerald has been on my podcast, so we'll probably repost her podcast if you want to know more about how to use the 911 system. And also, just speaking about that too, a couple of our guests are also been on our podcast, UN50's podcast, and we'll probably be reposting those if you want to know more about them, since we don't have a lot of time to do that today. Just real quick, we're having some technical difficulties, and apologize for that. We will be sharing the full discussion on our page for you to watch at a later date. And so what we're going to do now as we head toward the end is we're going to go ahead and we've been talking about education and how basically everything that we've talked about kind of goes back to that of all the systems that we talk about. So Beverly, our historian, is going to kind of give you a historic perspective of how this country has known about things, social things, and systems that could be quite beneficial to all of us. Bev?
Thank you. Our panelists have just discussed social issues that have had an impact on the lives of marginalized communities. We have reviewed 4 commission reports that were published between 1922 to 1992, which came as a result of riots, disorders, or protests. I hope to demonstrate through history that we are still discussing societal issues today in 2022 that have been discussed and determined as the catalyst for disorders, riots, and protests. The report we start with is as early as 1922, titled The Negro and Chicago. It was one of the most violent riots of the time. This was born out of the Red Summer of 1919, which were a series of several riots that took place in more than 36 cities across the country. This report and its findings regarding the spark or factors for the disorders were overcrowding, poor housing conditions, unemployment, underemployment, and disparities in education. The previous factors were due to the migration of Negroes into communities which were already largely inhabited by immigrants who accounted as the primary group of the workforce, especially in the North. All of the reports starting with 1922 were commissioned by the government for such riots, and understanding in order to prevent disorders of the future. So the 1922 Negro and Chicago report recommended better housing, equal rights in public places, and the hiring and equal pay of both black and white officers, as well as hiring school staff that would promote good race relations. The next report reviewed was the Negro in Harlem, which came in response to the Harlem race riots of 1935. The riot was sparked after rumors of a black Puerto Rican teen being killed by police spread throughout the community. The report came after this to recommend the prevention of future riots or disorders. Some of those recommendations were enforcing housing codes, enforcing housing plans for the future, and establishing funds for an emergency school building program. The next report is titled the Kerner Commission Report of 1967, due to civil disorders spanning from 1963 to 1967, which also occurred during the Civil Rights Movement. There were 164 riots reported within the first 9 months of 1967, January through September. The factors for those riots were said to be unemployment and underemployment, abrasive police practices, which we now refer to as police brutality, and poor effectiveness of the political structure, as well as inadequate education. The report's recommendations in preventing future riots or disorders were as follows: bringing government closer to the people they serve and including Negroes in the formulation of public policies. Also recommended eliminating racial discrimination in northern and southern states as stated in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The report also recommended open housing laws, as well as eliminating illiteracy through greater federal adult basic education, and also the extension of quality childhood education. The fourth and final report is titled the Webster Commission, which were one of several analyses of the 1992 Los Angeles riots after the acquittal of those officers who brutally beat Rodney King. Amanda Peterson, a professor of sociology, presented a portion of this commission online. Right. In this submission, she included a submission by the Bloods and Crips gang, who called a truce after the riots and submitted an educational proposal to the commission. The Bloods and Crips proposal included $300 million to go towards the reconstruction and refurbishment of the Los Angeles Unified School District, $200 million to be donated for computers, supplies, and updated books, and the allocation of necessary books for all students. The Bloods and Crips also proposed that all teachers shall receive an increase in wages. They proposed the necessary provisions for accelerated educational learning programs, such as tutoring for all subjects. A consistent theme in all of these report recommendations in preventing future disorders were housing, unemployment, police brutality, and education. Thank you.
So basically, the country and the wisdom of our government has identified things that could be beneficial to not just black and brown community members, but all of us. The equity across the board has been identified as to some of the reasons as to why things are the way they are.
And no change has come.
What'd you say?
And no change has come.
No change has come. We're talking 1922,
Insanity.
100 years, and we're still talking about these same conversations. And so my call to action kind of rests with education. That's for me, that's for you and 5-0. We go around and we, again, talk to primarily black and brown folks on how to safely interact with law enforcement. Currently, I'm down in Kinston doing some work as a pilot training to talk to their law enforcement officers. The leadership there decided that since I was out in the last 7 years, been talking to black and brown folks, they said, well, if you're talking to them, they must be telling you something about law enforcement. So I created a training for law enforcement so they could understand what it is the issues for the black and brown community has with law enforcement. So we're down there doing a pilot training with the Kinston Police Department based on the things I've learned by listening to 3,000 plus black and brown bodies over the last 7 years. one of the primary things, there are 5 things, but the primary thing is respect. Respect. RESPECT.
Come on.
It's what it is. Simple stuff. And when I tell these officers, I'm saying, look, I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just telling you what I know. And based on the information received from the individuals I'm talking to. Again, primarily black and brown folks. Respect. Something as simple as when you go to a community meeting, instead of huddling at the back of the building with your arms folded, go sit down at the table with the black folks and have a conversation. Because the possibility is they know where the bodies are buried, and they also know where the drugs are. So if you start building relationships with the members of your community that you are serving, the relationships begin there. So Kinston has determined that this information could benefit them in their community relationships with their officers. So we're hoping that it catches on. If not, then at least Kinston has shown the will to be progressive enough to hear what the black folks are saying about them in their community. And it is simply respect. I get a lot of, well, I walk by, they won't even speak to me. Open your mouths and deliver good customer service. So the call for action for me, for UN50, are 3 things: education, education, education.
Right on.
The bottom line is, as the principal has said, why don't we use that building as a hub for all sources and resources to not only help individuals process what they're going through, help the teachers with the student who probably saw a body in the middle of the road and did not do his homework last night to understand how to process that. And then because mama and daddy, auntie and grandmother are coming into that building at some point, wrap the service around that entire family because they're coming to the school building. They may not go to churches as much as they used to, but they come in to watch Ray Ray play basketball. Education. Pay attention to your local government and making sure that they are doing something and putting the resources they need at education. All of us have first grade pictures that we don't usually necessarily show, but we have first grade pictures because we all start out at the first grade, at the level, at the starting point. So what is it that we need to all end up? Equity. Equity. I don't need to go into a dark building on one side of the community and it's dark, and I go on another side of the community and it's got architect that looks like it's about to take off because the equity between the 2 schools is not fair.
Yes.
Education, education, education. The next thing is voting. Vote, vote, vote. Ain't telling you who to vote for, ain't telling you why you need to vote for them, but vote. I see you in that long line waiting for the expensive coffee. I see you in that long line trying to get that biscuit on the way to work. I see you in that line getting that hot sign at the Krispy Kreme because I'm in the line behind you. But check and trust and believe, I need you to go vote. I'm only asking you to do that once every 4 years. If you can stand in line almost every day trying to get that biscuit, you can pull up a chair, pull up a book, turn on the phone, get in line, and wait, and vote. Don't listen to the noise. They are not taking your voting rights away from you. They're making it a little bit more frustrating. Pull up a chair, get in line once every 4 years, and vote. Now, if you cannot do either one of those, education or vote, do mentoring. Reach back and get somebody. Bring somebody along. Somebody's paying attention to you. All we need is to support and show the love for others. That's all we need to do. Just reach back and get someone. LA and I are working with justice served persons. They just need support and love. The only difference between me and a justice served person is sister didn't get caught. Okay? We got the folks in the room. We got my amen corner in the room. That's the only reason. Reach back. I have been mentoring a young woman for 15 years. I met her at the age of 7. Her father has been in and out of prison the entire time. He is currently back in prison as a drug dealer. At the age of 9, she was visiting her father. She remembers the door being kicked in with a man with Timberlines on. That's all she remembers, and the gunfight started. 9 years old. I've been in law enforcement and ain't never been in a gunfight. She's experienced all of that. She was a primary caretaker for her mother at 7. To this very day, she does not understand how to take care of herself. All she wants and all she needs is to know, I love her. All she needs to know is that every time she stumbles, I'm going to be there.
That's right.
All she needs to know that I'm always going to be there. She will continue to make mistakes. She just needs to know I'm going to love her no matter what. Right. What she says to me, and one of the most things that she says to me, besides telling me that she loves me, is the fact I saw different. I saw different. And because of that, she's being focused and doing her best to do whatever she feels like she needs to do based on the journey that she wants to take.
Yes.
She wants to take. So if nothing else, take the time, reach back, and be a mentor. I want to say thank you to my guests who are in the room. I have county government in the room. I have an individual who works with transitional men returning a transitional home. I have an individual here representing the community. I have an academic in the room who has a master's in sociology and criminology. Wonder how those two relate to each other. So that's in the room. So I'd also like to thank Moorhead Manor Bread and Breakfast with the innkeeper Daniel and Monica Edwards for having us here. I'd like to thank my panelists for taking the time to say yes and enjoying the conversation. Also, really thank you guys for doing this. It means a lot. And I just also like to thank my team who behind the scenes have been helping me navigate this for the last several months. Without you doing that, I'm not sure I know I could have done it without you, so thank you very much. Our video guy is Video Vital, and thank you for that crew for being here. And so hope you'll join us and follow us on the social media, UN50. Again, as we always sign out on our podcast, stay safe, stay well, peace.
Peace.
Peace.